Welcome to the most horrible history lesson ever, or should that be the best ever? Bits of history that your teachers could never tell you, with all the gory bits left in. Kellogg's has teamed up with Horrible Histories and with the writer Terry Deary, that's me, to bring you a series of disgusting tales from some of the most famous periods in history. Some of them are so foul, you may even have to hold your nose and close your eyes as you listen to them. This is one of 6 CDs in the series, available free on special packs of cornflakes, Frosties, Cocoa Pops and Rice Krispies. Each 30-minute CD is exclusive to Kellogg's, so you'll be one of the few people to know about some of the darkest secrets from the days of old. You may just want to eat your breakfast before pinning back your ears. Enjoy. Hello, I'm Terry Deary, author of the Horrible Histories books, and I'm here to tell you school history can be really horrible. Horribly confusing at times. People can't even agree what happened yesterday. You know, the sort of argument you have with your friend. He says, "I scored a brilliant goal yesterday," and you argue, "Don't be daft, the ball went in off your bum." When events happened last year, last century, or hundreds of years ago, we have no chance of knowing the whole truth. Let me give you an example. Some historians have said, there were more women in the Middle Ages than men. You see, the poor men died in battle. Another historian says, no, there were more men than women. The poor women died in childbirth. Historians have argued both ways, and they can't both be right. You see the problem? They can't even agree what the Middle Ages are. Some say they run from 500 AD to 1500, some say they start in 1066 and end in 1485. And that's what we are going for, because we only have half an hour. Here's another example. Queen Isabeau was described as a tall, short woman who was dark and fair. The French peasants were starving and they were well fed. They were smelly people who had a bath every day. Who can you believe? No one. Your school books will probably give you one side of the story. Knights were brave and noble warriors. They were called Sir. Horrible Histories will give you the other side. Knights were ignorant, vicious bullies, which is probably why we call teachers Sir. Listen to the facts and make up your own mind. In the Middle Ages, the people didn't have horrible history books, so they could be pretty ignorant. They were superstitious. Some of the stories they believed were little more than fairy tales. Take the story of Queen Fenella in Scotland. It's a horrible history story, but do you believe every word? Once upon a time, there was a beautiful queen, and her name was Queen Fenella. Fenella was lovely, but she was ever so sad, because her dear son, Malcolm, had died. She cried and cried, but that did no good. So in the end, she decided to find out how Malcolm had died. They say she was a little bit of a witch, but a good witch. Fenella went to her cauldron and stirred the magic brew, chanting, "Eye of bat and sprinkle of talcum, tell me who killed poor little Malcolm." The pot, it bubbled and boiled, and then it answered, "Your Malcolm died, the poor young thing, murdered by a rotten king. Dry your eyes, good sweet Fenella, old King Ken's the guilty fella." Now, the only King Ken that Queen Fin kenned was cruel King Kenneth in Kinkington, the kingdom next door. I said, the only King Ken that Queen Fin kenned was cruel King Kenneth from Kinkington, the kingdom next door. Fenella knew she wasn't strong enough to raise an army and go to war with King Kenneth, so she came up with a clever plan instead. She used all her magic arts to make a brass statue of King Kenneth. It was yellow as Fenella's curls and as shiny as the sun on the loch. In the glistening statue's hand there was an apple covered in a rainbow of jewels. When the statue was finished, she put it in the middle of her finest room at Fetterken and invited King Kenneth to come and see it. Kenneth arrived, and Fenella gave a low curtsy.
"I am your humble servant, King Ken,"
she said.
"Please accept this gift."
Cruel Ken looked at the statue and said,
"I'll never get that on the back of my horse."
Fenella smiled sweetly and said,
Just the apple, Ken. Reach out and take the apple.
The Killing King stretched out a hand, while Fenella ducked. As soon as his hand touched the apple, a dozen hidden crossbows in the walls fired poisoned arrows into his body. It was a trick, Ken cried as he died.
And it serves you jolly well right,
Fenella said, with her sweet smile. And Queen Fenella lived happy ever after, until she died an even more horrible death than Kenneth. The end. Now, do you believe that story? While we're in Scotland, of course, Scotland had a thing about witches. In England, Ireland and Wales, witches would be hanged if they were found guilty. In Scotland, something much more horrible usually happened. They were burned at the stake. These victims were usually harmless women who made simple charms to cure their ill friends or help sick animals. Many villages had a wise woman who would know these old cures and only pass them on when they were dying. If a wise woman had been kind enough to write it down, then her remedy book may have looked something like this. Dear villagers, I, Meg, a being of sound mind, leave these clever cures to you, good people, to practice. Does your husband suffer from baldness? Then burn pigeon droppings and rub the ashes into the scalp to cure his baldness. A gout can be very painful, I know, but to cure gout, you should take the skin from the feet of a large vulture and wrap it round his heel. There's not a lot of vultures round these parts, so I prefer the other cure. They say you can boil a frog in olive oil and rub the liquid on a gouty foot. Do you suffer from pain? One day someone will invent aspirin. It's a little round white thing and... oh, never mind. Meanwhile, to take away pain, take a bow and arrow and then shoot the arrow from east to west. As the arrow disappears, so will the pain. Well, your pain will disappear. I'll never forget the story my granny told me. She said in the 1500s, the Bishop of St. Andrews was seriously ill. He was hung upside down for a week and fed the flesh of puppy dogs. He recovered. Of course, the puppies didn't. I'm not in favour of cruelty to animals, but I do know that the wise women of Scotland believe the best way to cure a raging fever was to throw a cat over the sick person. Herbs and plants are much kinder. You just have to remember, treat like with like. Trouble with the blood? Blood is red, so drink beetroot juice. And rhubarb is wonderful. Oh, for those of you who live in England, those rotten Romans have invented custard. But it hasn't got to Scotland yet, because the Romans didn't. Now, I know some of you have trouble sleeping. When that happens, I try eating nettles mixed with the white of an egg. My dad always said, sleep on the edge of the bed and you'll soon drop off. But he was a bit soft in the head. There are people who have funny turns. But I have a certain cure. Mark the spot where the first funny turn happened and bury a black cockerel there, alive. Of course, it'll soon be dead. Some of you might like to dig it up and use the skull as a drinking cup. That cures all sorts of illnesses. You young girls that want to make yourself beautiful, like me, and then wash your face in goat's milk. Drinking it also cures a hangover if you've had too much wine. But fathers, beware. Don't drink the stuff your ugly daughter's just washed her face in. Then there's toothache. Just take an iron nail and drill it into the gum where it hurts, till there's blood on the end. Oh yes, there's blood on the end. Drive the nail into an oak tree. and the toothache will be cured. And finally, a warning. Everyone knows that a brew made from foxgloves can cure heart disease. I want to tell you that I tried it. It worked, so I took some more. But too much will poison you and... oh dear. Oh dear. Witches in fairy tales are mad people who fly around on broomsticks. But the people of the Middle Ages took witchcraft very seriously. It cost a lot of innocent lives. The English were fighting in France and winning. But then a French girl, Joan of Arc, said she heard angels telling her to fight the English. She got some armour from the French king and set off to fight them. The odd thing was that she started winning. Well, the English were furious, beaten by a woman. Then her enemies captured her and sold her to the English. Now, it wouldn't be very sporting for the English to execute a brave enemy soldier, so they accused Joan of being a witch and then executed her. She was burned alive. It was a mean trick, and Joan deserves to be remembered as a wonderful woman, even though she sometimes had to keep the fact she was a woman secret. Because in those days they didn't take women very seriously. We should celebrate her life with a song a bit like this. 1, 2, 3.
Joan of Arc, what a lark! She fought and she dressed just like a bloke, like a bloke. Joan of Arc, just a spark, sent that lassie up in smoke, up in smoke.
I was in the field, she said, the angels, they were chatty. They said I had to fight the English, maybe she was batty.
Completely batty.
She went to see the Prince of France to get a sword and breastplate. The prince, he said, a lass like you should wear a woolen vest, mate.
That would be her best mate. Joan of Arc, what a lark! She fought and she dressed just like a bloke, like a bloke. Joan of Arc, just a spark, sent that lassie up in smoke, up in smoke.
But Joan, she went to Orleans-town and fought and feared for nothing. The nasty English all around, they got a fearful stuffing.
Oh, such a stuffing!
At last the English captured her, they tried her with some vicars. They said you will be sorry when that fire gets to your kneecaps.
He said your kneecaps. Joan of Arc, what a lark! She fought and she dressed just like a bloke, like a bloke. Joan of Arc, just a spark, sent that lassie up in smoke, up in smoke.
What was it about the French and the English? Well, it went back to 1066, when the Normans came across from France and smashed the English at the Battle of Hastings. The Normans were led by William the Conqueror, Big Bad Bill. Not a nice man. The Normans didn't like the English. In fact, they didn't even like their own family. William the Conqueror's brother, Odo, looked after England while Bill popped back to Normandy. What thanks did Odo get? William threw him in jail. But Bill's sons were even worse. They fought against each other, and they even fought against their dear old dad. If William the Conqueror could have written a letter to his wife Matilda in 1079, William probably couldn't write. He had clerks to do that for him. Anyway, it may have sounded like this. Gerberoi Castle, Normandy, January 1079. Dearest Matilda, you won't believe what our Robert has come and done. Only gone and beaten his dad in battle. That's all. The ungrateful little cochon, as we say in French. As you know, he was rebelling against my rule, so I rode up to Gerberoi with a few hundred lads to sort him out. What does he do? He locks the gates. What do? Well, I besiege him, don't I? A few hungry weeks without his venison pasties, and he'll come begging for mercy, won't he? Always been fond of his grub as our Robert. But he doesn't. Instead, he gets his forces together and comes charging out of the castle. He attacks me! I thought I was supposed to be attacking him! Of course, he's made a big mistake. No one's ever beaten your William in battle, as you know. He charges straight for me, takes me by surprise, that does. Knocks me clean off me horse. Oh, don't worry, my love, he doesn't hurt me very much. The rest of his men begin moving in for the kill when that English lad, Toki, rides up with a fresh horse and saves my life. Poor young Toki got killed, but the main thing is I survived. Now, I don't want to worry you, my darling, but our young Will was fighting on my side and he took a bit of a knock. He's recovering nicely and he's quite a hero. I always thought he was a useless little twerp until now, as you know. But I've decided to give him the throne of England when I go to that great throne in the sky. As for Robert, he can have Normandy, and the ungrateful little beggar is welcome to it. Home soon, my dearest one. Love to our little Henry. Your loving husband, William. Conqueror. And here's me seal. Not that sort of seal. And we can imagine the reply from Matilda.
Normandy, January 1079. Dear William, just wait till I see our Robert. Fancy knocking you off your horse. He needs teaching some manners. Mind, I always said you spoilt that boy something rotten. A few whacks from the flat of your sword would have done him no harm at all. Do you think you could remember to bring me some of that local woolen cloth? Green, if you can get it. Hurry home. The dogs are missing you. And I'm keeping your throne warm. Love, Matilda. Oh, P.S. Don't forget to wipe your feet before you come into the Great Hall. I've just had new rushes put down. Kissy, kissy.
William forgave Robert enough to leave him Normandy. But when old William died, young William Rufus got England. This caused a lot of quarrels between the brothers. Each wanted what the other had. And a third brother, Henry, got just £5,000 of silver, which he hurried off to weigh and lock away. Who came off best? Well, Henry, actually. William Rufus was killed by an arrow when he was out hunting in the New Forest. Though some historians think Henry may have arranged that accident. Henry took William's English throne, crossed over to Normandy, and defeated Robert in battle, and took Normandy too. Henry had the lot. William the Conqueror would have been proud of his murdering, fighting, ruthless son. The nasty Normans didn't have everything their own way. The living legend was an English freedom fighter, Hereward the Wake. The truth is, Hereward went on fighting against William the Conqueror's forces when other English leaders had given up. Hereward joined forces with Danish invaders and robbed Peterborough Abbey to stop its riches falling into the hands of the Normans. The rebels hid in the marshes, where the Normans eventually surrounded and captured them, but Hereward escaped and pretty well disappeared from history. Of course, the Middle Ages weren't all about knights and fighting. Ordinary people, peasants like you or me, well, like you anyway, peasants, women and children had a cheerless time of it. In 1322, Bernard de Irlande's baby daughter was playing in her father's shop. A passing pig wandered into the shop, bit the baby on the head and killed her. What a swine. British peasant children had no clothes at all until they could walk. Before then, they were kept warm by being laid in front of the fire. Curious little crawlers ended up cooked. But even the ones who lay still could have an accident. An old law said, "If a woman place her infant by the hearth, and a man put water in the cauldron, and it boileth over, and the child be scalded to death, the woman must be punished for her neglect." If there was a law against it, then there must have been a lot of cases of it happening. Hey, notice, it's the woman who gets the blame and not the man. But that's another story. Parents didn't have the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents to advise them. In Canterbury, some very young children were left by the river and drowned. In another case, an archer was practicing his shooting and accidentally shot a child. Worst of all were the beggars who broke their children's limbs so the public would give generously to the twisted, suffering little child. The parents were given advice on dealing with troublesome girls, and it went, "If your daughter will rebel and will not bow down low, if any of them do some wrong, then do not curse or blow. Just take a large rod in your hand and beat them in a row until they cry for mercy and until their guilt they know." Horrible History's health warning. Do not let your class teacher see that bit of advice. The kids didn't even have any television in those days, but maybe they had some good stories around the fireside. If your mum or dad was good at telling stories, then you may have enjoyed the story of Prince Hugo. Once upon a time, there was a brave young knight called Prince Hugo. There was nothing our young Hugo liked better than doing a bit of embroidery. Hugo made all his own dresses and let his hair grow down to his waist. "He's a bit odd," the courtiers in his castle whispered to one another, but Hugo had his reasons. He didn't let the gossip needle him. Needle him! Hugo could have passed for a girl, which, as it happened, was exactly what he wanted. You see, he'd heard about the poor Princess Hilda. She was the most beautiful, clever, and tragic princess in the whole of Normandy, maybe even in the whole world. Hilda's father, Count Walgund, had locked her in a tall tower. The tower was in a forest, and the forest was infested with the wildest wolves in the West. Count Walgund was so devoted to his dear daughter that he didn't want to lose his lovely lass to some layabout lout of a lad. He didn't want her running off and getting married, unless it was to a perfect husband. One day, Hugo put on his best frock, embroidered by himself with a squillion sequence he'd sewn on, and arrived at Count Walgund's castle. "I am a lost lady whose homeland has been conquered by a cruel king. I only ask a bed for the night, good Count." Before the cool Count could answer, his Countess cried, "Look at that dress! What a work of needlewoman's wondrous art! You simply must teach our daughter how to embroider like that, mustn't she, Count?" Oh, now we know that's exactly what our clever little Hugo was after all the time, don't we? Next day he was in the tower and teaching the lovely Hilda the ropes. Well, the threads, if you know what I mean. Hilda loved her new chum, loved her deep voice, her strong hands, her broad shoulders. "Excuse me," Hilda said after a week, "but would I be correct in thinking that you are really a man disguised as a woman?" Hugo clicked his long fingers. "Curses! How did you guess?" "I think it's probably the beard that gave you away," Hilda confessed. Hugo rubbed his rough chin and sighed. "Sorry, you don't mind, do you?" "Mind?" Hilda cried. "I'm chuffed to fluffy fairy feathers. I think you're gorgeous." "Oh, you're not so bad yourself," Hugo admitted. Before another week was out, they were secretly married. Then Hugo declared, "I have to leave now. I must find a way to persuade your father that I will make him a good son-in-law." "That's a bit sudden, my pet," Hilda moaned, but she saw the sense in what he said. Hugo chopped his hair and swapped his female dress for male chain mail. Off he rode on crusade, where he fought side by side with Count Walgund. They were gone a long time, a long, long time. Well, a couple of years anyway. And things had been happening in the tall tower. "Come home with me, my brave young friend," Count Walgund said to Hugo. Now we know that's exactly what our clever little Hugo was after all the time, don't we? But as they rode close to the tall tower, Walgund saw a wolf cross the path and cried, "After it! Kill it! We can't have wolves wandering my paths and putting my people in peril!" So they chased the wolf, who turned to face the fierce knights. The wolf dropped a bundle she was carrying and slipped off into the dark, dark trees. But the knights saw the white linen bundle wriggling. They stopped and picked it up. It was a baby boy.
Good grief! Wonder who you belong to, my little man.
Walgund warbled.
What a wonderful child. Wouldn't mind one like that for my grandson. Let's visit my daughter in the nearby tower. See if she can care for it till we find the rightful mother.
When they reached the tower and unlocked the door, Hilda rushed out. Was she going to fuss over her father? Was she going to hug Hugo? No. She ran across the courtyard and snatched the baby from the two men and wailed, "My baby! The washerwoman left the kitchen door open this morning and he crawled off into the forest. I was sure he'd be killed by wolves by now."
Your baby?
Count Walgund said in wonder.
Who's the father?
Hilda raised her arm and pointed at Prince Hugo.
Why, Hugo here.
The Count was confused, you can count on that. But when he finally understood, he happily hugged his daughter, his grandson, and his son-in-law. "What a day," Hugo sighed. "I've gained a son I never knew I had."
What a day, Walgund cried. I've gained a son and a grandson I never knew I had.
"I've waited for your return before I named the child," Hilda said. "What should we call him?" Walgund looked at Hugo. Hugo looked at Walgund. The two knights looked at one another. They nodded. They said it together. "Wolf, of course!" Hilda and Hugo lived happy ever after. The superstitious people of the Measly Middle Ages thought of death as an old man in a hooded cloak and carrying a reaping hook or a scythe. In 1347, Death strolled through Europe with his scythe, mowing down some and missing others. Swish. In 1349, he sailed across the Channel to the British Isles. The terrified people never knew who was going to be next. As an Italian diary recorded, "There appeared certain swellings, and in 3 days the victims were dead. Purple-black blotches appeared on the skin, and you smelled absolutely revolting. The funeral bell would ring, and off you went." That sort of swell, spit, smell, swish, dong, you were gone. Wouldn't it be great if they taught you something useful in school, like how to spot the plague? Hey, we could just turn it into a little song. First you feel a little poorly, then you start to swell. Then you start to spit some blood, and then you really smell. Then you know it's time to ring your funeral bell. Then along comes Mr. Death and takes you off to, well... Death's scythe was the bubonic plague, and the piles of bodies grew like chopped straw into a haystack. They loaded them onto carts, dropped them into pits, or, in Avignon in France, threw them in the river. Children were Death's particular favourites when it came to the swish. Some preachers said that the children probably got what they deserved. One explained, "It may be that children suffer heaven's revenge because they miss going to church, or because they despise their fathers and mothers. God kills children with the plague, as you can see every day, because, according to the old law, children who are rebels or disobedient to their parents are punished by death." Whew! You can see that not much has changed. Doctors already had some wacky cures for the illness. Here's a quick quiz for you to answer, true or false. Which of these cures did the Middle Ages doctors say would help the plague? Number 1. Sit in a sewer, so the bad air of the plague is driven off by the worse air of the drains. True or false? True. Number 2. Kill all the cats and dogs in the town. True or false? That's true. Number 3. Wear a magpie's beak around your neck. True or false? False. The magpie's beak was to cure toothache. Number 4. Swallow powders of crushed emeralds if you're rich enough. True or false? True. Number 5. Let blood out of the patient if the patient's horoscope was right. True or false? True. Number 6. Cut a hole in the skull to let out the devil. True or false? False. That was a cure for madness. Number 7. Drink a medicine of 10-year-old treacle. True or false? True. Number 8. Shave a live chicken's bottom and strap it to the plague sore. True or false? Terrible, but true. Number 9. Stuff mustard and onion up your nose. True or false? False. That was a cure for a cold, and it's not very nice. Number 10. March from town to town flogging yourself with a whip. Did they think that would cure the plague? True or false? True. So, how many did you score out of 10? It doesn't really matter because none of the cures worked anyway. The real cause of the plague wasn't discovered till just 100 years ago. And people still don't understand. They think rats carried the plague. Get off, you rat! Fleas carried the plague germs. They lived on the rats and their germs killed the rats. A dead rat is not very tasty, so the fleas looked for a new home. If there were no rats about, then the fleas would hop onto a human and spread the germs to that human. When their new human friend died, they'd hop onto another human, maybe the person who'd nursed the first victim. And so it went on. In some towns in Britain, more than half of the people died. Swish. And that just about sums up the measly Middle Ages, with a plague of purple spots, and the king was a fella called Death. Swish. We hope you enjoyed learning about the despicable goings-on of our ancestors as much as we did when we made these CDs. Don't forget to watch out for other CD audiobooks on special packs of Kellogg's cereals. You can learn about the terrible Tudors, the rotten Romans, the vile Victorians, incredible Ireland, and the vicious Vikings. Look for the whole horrible lot.
Horrible Histories are written and read by Terry Deary and produced by Nick Baker for Testbed Productions. Original music is by Danny Fromaggio, sound design by Dirk Maggs. Horrible Histories are published by Scholastic Children's Books. And they're really horrible.